let's just think in general about vaccines and rheumatoid arthritis and the safety of vaccines and rheumatoid arthritis, and then the very focal issue around COVID-19 and whether you are or are not safe in the context of the COVID vaccine program. I think the first thing to say is that vaccines in general are a good idea for people with rheumatoid arthritis. Let's start at the very beginning. What's a vaccine for? A vaccine is designed to reduce the likelihood of we becoming infected with whichever infectious agent that vaccine is designed to combat. And history is littered with success in this area. I mean, think of the smallpox vaccine, which has eradicated a disease, which is just incredible. Now, I'm not sure that we're going to be talking about eradication of diseases anytime soon, just to manage expectation. But we have a whole range of vaccines that we actually routinely recommend for use in people with rheumatoid arthritis. Pneumovax, annual influenza vaccine, the list goes on. And in fact, we have a lot of experience of the use of those vaccines in people with rheumatoid arthritis. And the overwhelming evidence is that they are safe and reasonable to use. Now, an analogy I quite like to use is that most people will get in the car as a driver or a passenger, and they will consider that it's a perfectly reasonable thing to do to get in the car to drive somewhere. That, of course, does not mean that every time you get in a car it's perfectly safe. Just every now and then you'll be in a road accident, and God forbid, very rarely, something quite serious might happen. And so the flip side of the argument is that occasionally vaccines will cause problems. And either the vaccine itself will cause a problem, there'll be an allergic reaction to the vaccine, or possibly the vaccine will trigger something else. It will trigger someone's arthritis, and it'll cause a flare of the arthritis. Now, I used an interesting word there. I said cause a flare. Actually, the truth is it may be associated with a flare. And I'm using my language very, very carefully there, because causing is when, so for example, a new black Labrador puppy has arrived in the McInnes household, much to the consternation of the older black Labrador McInnes who already lives here. Now, if I could show you, you maybe can't quite see it, but my forearm is covered in cuts and bruises because said new Labrador addition to McInnes household turns out to be the first black Labrador in history who prefers eating humans to anything else, and spent most of the morning trying to eat my arm, which was embarrassing because I was on a call to the MRC at the time. Anyway, in general, having a black Labrador is a very good thing. But when Toby, delightful wee fellow that is, bit me, there was a causal relationship between the puppy, the teeth, and the now rapidly healing wound in the arm. That's causal. Associated might be that somebody noticed that there was a puppy in the McInnes house, and I was walking down the street later on that day and said, "Oh, I see you've got a cut in your arm. Did that puppy bite you?" Now, the answer might be, yes, he jolly well did, and he's gone off to the glue factory soon, or, well, actually, no, I was cutting the hedge, and that's why I've got a cut in my arm, but it's possible that maybe the puppy could have caused the problem. Why am I labouring the point? Because what you're hearing a lot at the moment is people saying, the vaccine caused this, the vaccine caused that. Well, at the moment, I think we're at a stage of saying the vaccine is associated with the occurrence of something. So that's the general world of vaccines. Now, let's get specific. COVID-19 vaccines. What do we know about them? Well, first of all, they're new. They're actually a miracle of modern molecular medicine. Remember that this time last year, most of them were in trial phase. In fact, some of them didn't even exist. Remember that it normally takes 5 years or so for vaccines to be developed. And in fact, modern molecular medicine made these things in 5 or 6 months. And it's a very Scottish thing, half empty, half full glass of milk, or whatever else you like having in the morning. Well, I'm very much a glass is half full in my view of this. And the vaccines were developed quickly, but they were developed very carefully and very cleverly. And they've been tested in as many people as would normally be used for vaccine testing. And in fact, now are being given to literally millions and millions and millions of people very quickly. And the safety profile for the general population of the COVID-19 vaccines is highly satisfactory. And back to the traveling by car analogy, if you're thinking about whether to get in a car or not, most of the time, most people do. If you're thinking about whether you should have a COVID-19 vaccine or not, the risks to you of a serious event occurring in getting COVID-19 infection is far greater to you overall than the risk of taking a vaccine. So at the moment, for me, it's relatively straightforward. You're far better going for the vaccine than not. And there's no evidence at the moment, and I would refer you to the most up-to-date data here, which comes from the COVID-19 registry that we set up in EULAR. And I speak here with I'm now the ex-president of EULAR, much to my wife's delight. As of 2 weeks ago, I stepped back from my EULAR presidency to become the past president. But one of the things I guess I'm most proud of my EULAR presidency, which was an unusual experience, cancelling congresses and running the whole thing from my study here in Glasgow rather than going to meetings, was the COVID registry. So we've looked at now several thousand people with immune-mediated rheumatic diseases, and we're not seeing a serious signal here. Yes, there have been a small number of people who had serious adverse events, just as there have been in the general population, but we're not quite there to be able to say absolutely no difference. But at the moment, the data look encouraging. There are a small number of people who are developing an association with a flare of their arthritis. And that, I think, is exactly what we've seen with other vaccines. So the safety from the largest database we've got so far, the EULAR database, looks entirely satisfactory. The safety of vaccines in general outweighs the risks. I cannot guarantee that you will not have an adverse reaction, because I would be dishonest if I did. But overall, the risk to you, if you're getting up to date with rheumatoid arthritis, is greater unvaccinated than vaccinated, of a poor outcome for your life for the rest of this third wave and, God forbid, subsequent waves of the virus. I hope that helps, Claire.
Indeed it does, and there's a lot of chat going on. I'm keeping a sort of half an eye on the chat on the Facebook, and quite a lot of people are saying, you know, they've either done home antibody tests after the vaccine or have taken part, and I just some explanation about it's not all just about antibodies, is it? About how the level of protection.
You know, it's funny, and I think we'll probably get to this later in our conversation about what we're going to do next. You know, let me just think out loud with you about these antibody tests. So first of all, what does an antibody test tell you? Well, an antibody test tells you about an amount of an antibody protein that is in your blood the day you got the test. That's all it tells you. It doesn't tell you whether you've got enough antibody, and the current commercially available tests do not tell you very much about the type of antibody you've got. Is it a good antibody, or is it just one that happened to be along for the ride? You know, we've all been to a dinner party where there's some really interesting people at dinner, and there's some folk who are, well, they ate the food, they maybe had a glass of wine or had a nice coffee. They weren't terribly interesting, and yeah, but they were there. So some of the antibodies that are made when you have a vaccine are very, very useful. We call those neutralizing antibodies. So they are antibodies that will prevent the virus doing its thing. But there are some other antibodies that are made that are a bit less interesting. So at the moment, the antibodies that are made that are and then measured by these tests don't necessarily tell you how active your level of protection is. And at the moment, there is no agreed level of antibody that tells you, I'm okay, nothing to worry about.
Right.
What we do, though, know at the population level is, and there's some data just in the last couple of days online, on average, the higher your antibody level, the more likely you are to be protected. But that doesn't tell you, if your name is Mrs. Smith and you live in Maidenhead, just thought of somewhere else, but Glasgow, Edinburgh, heavens, if you ever go to Edinburgh, it doesn't really translate to the individual level. And that's the problem. So folk are looking at tests and saying, what does that mean for me? And the answer at the moment is that I don't really know what that antibody level means for a protection. And then in your question, Claire, there's an additional subtlety, which is antibody the only thing that happens in the immune system? Absolutely not. The immune system, in another life, I've studied the immune system for now, I'm getting old, 30 years. And the immune system is a fascinating, beautiful, wondrous, complicated thing. It's very, very complex. There are, literally billions of white blood cells that have to talk to each other. Many different types of proteins are made by those many different types of cells that have to work together. And to keep things simple, we do tend to think of the immune system in two parts: the antibody part and the white blood cell part, and the particular white blood cell that people have read about. So don't worry, there's not an immunology lecture coming, but quite a lot of people are reading now, and you hear people talk about a T cell. So forgive me using an immunological term, but it's out there in the BBC and it's out there in the news. So let me explain. The T cell is the kind of master regulatory cell. It's the part of the immune system that says, do or do not respond. And we are able now to measure the vaccine effect on the T cell, the regulatory bit, the switch on, switch off bit, and also the antibody level. Another way of thinking about this, I'm not massively fond of military analogies, but it works here. The antibodies are like the guys out there in the trenches, the guys out there doing the fighting. The T cell is a bit like the officer sitting back from the front line, looking at all the reports, thinking about, right, where am I going to send this group? Where am I going to send that group? And so we now know that your T cell response is at least as important as the antibody level, but that's not measured. And
exactly,
there are early.
I was bring that up. That's an excellent.
No, carry on, Claire.
Lots of people are commenting that this has been incredibly helpful, because sometimes it can be a bit blinding with science. And Elsa and I were talking earlier just about the different terms, immunocompromised, immunosuppressed, immunomodulated, and they're bandied around. And I think there's some confusion as to which category of those do people with RA fall into. And so in very simple terms, is there a difference? Are we talking about the same thing when we talk about immunocompromised, immunosuppressed, immunomodulated? And then I'm going to hand over to Elsa then for the next question.
If this was a medical or an immunology conference, we could spend all afternoon worrying about this. But let me cut through all the nonsense and make this dead simple for you. Either your immune system is working normally and well, or it is not working as well as it should be. It is as simple as that. And if someone's immune system is not working as well, they might be called immunosuppressed, they might be called immunocompromised. Those two terms pretty much mean the same thing. Immunomodulated is interesting because a modulation, if you think about it, that's like a thermostat in the wall. You can turn the heat up or you can turn the heat down. So modulating the immune system does mean something slightly different. So to treat cancer, we switch the immune system on. That's the immune therapies you're reading about in cancer. To treat arthritis, we switch the immune system down a little bit. We turn the thermostat down a bit. We'll come back to that in your later questions, I suspect, because that's very important for how the vaccine will work. So immune modulated means, have we switched the immune system up or down? That's the thermostat. But immune compromised, immune suppressed, don't worry about the detail. That just means that your immune system is not working quite as well as it should be. However, the good Lord gave us a very, very smart immune system. It's like an onion layer, or like the old fortresses. Let's stick with military analogies. The old castles in the olden days had many different walls. There was the outer wall, the inner wall, and then the special wall, and the king sat inside or the queen sat inside. And so the immune system has many layers of protection built in. And so even if one part of the immune system is not working as well as it should be, other parts of the immune system have an amazing ability to kick in. As I often say to people, biology is beautiful. It is the greatest story you ever read about. So I think in terms of the real world, why might someone with rheumatoid? So let's develop the question that some people in the Facebook call at the moment might be saying, okay, right, this guy, so now he's told me my immune system might not be working as well. Why? And if you've got rheumatoid arthritis, there are two reasons why your immune system might not be quite top notch. First reason is that your actual having rheumatoid means your immune system is slightly out of kilter. The immune system is causing damage in the joints. It's causing your fatigue. It's causing the feeling of weakness. Some of the immune proteins give the feeling of depression and anxiety that is such an important part of the disease. And so at one level, your immune system, think of it as being almost diverted. We've all had that experience where our mind is on something else, and even a simple task we don't do very well. I don't know if any of you have done this, but I've put cold water into a cup of tea because I was thinking about so many things. I've forgotten I hadn't actually boiled the kettle. Just telling it how it is. But all my patients, if any of them, poor souls, are listening, they're busy saying, right, I need a new doctor very quickly. He makes cold cups of tea. So the thing, of course, is that I was distracted. And so the immune system, if it's very busy dealing with the joints, may become a little distracted. The second reason someone with rheumatoid arthritis might have a lower than normal response is because of the medicines we use. And this is where life's going to get quite interesting, because not all medicines are made equal. Some have a pretty significant effect on your immune system. Others are a much subtler, milder effect. And I think it's almost certain that different immune therapies will have differential effects on how effective vaccines are. And that may be something we can come to later, Claire or Ailsa, if you wish. But that's where it becomes quite important for us to know what you're on, and when you last took your medicine, and when we're thinking about giving the vaccine. And at the moment, we've got sensible guesses as to how we should do that. And very soon we'll have data, we'll have trials that will give us the right answer.
You've just said the magic.
You're explaining things so beautifully, Ian. Over to Ailsa.
Yes, I mean, I've always admired Ian's ability to explain incredibly complex science in a way that we can all understand. So let's hope that we can continue in that vein, Ian.
No pressure, Ailsa. I'm feeling anxious already.
Ian, you're involved, well, you're not involved, you're the lead investigator in the Octave study, which I'm sure some of the people watching today will have heard about because it's been in the national press. And I'd be grateful if you could tell everybody a bit more about that. I appreciate that we haven't got all the answers yet, and there may be things you can't tell us about at the moment, but it will be really good to know, because one of the things that I'm concerned about as being somebody who was shielding for all that length of time, and I know that even although I've had both my jabs, I won't be as protected as someone like Claire, for example. So how much can I get back out into society? How much do I need to continue to keep my guard up and be safe effectively?
Yeah, I know, absolutely, Ailsa. So two different questions really there. One was, what is the Octave trial? And two, how is it going to help us to give you and many people like you reassurance that it's ready? Yeah, it's time to go. The green light is on. Let's get back full on to life. Well, let me quickly tell you about Octave. It's a clinical study, as the name would infer. It's one of a small number of national trials that are being run under the auspices of either the MRC or the Vaccine Task Force, in turn acting on behalf of Professor Chris Whitty and Professor Jonathan Bantam and the UK government. I should declare that I'm the chief investigator of the Octave study, but it's an incredible team effort, and there are other doctors and professionals who have done an amazing job in making it happen incredibly quickly. It's asking the following question. If I have a disease that in theory could make me vulnerable to COVID infection, how well do I respond to the vaccine? Because if my disease makes me more vulnerable to the vaccine not being as effective, it's your question, isn't it? I've had 2 shots of whatever vaccine it is, probably doesn't matter what one at the moment. Am I protected? So that's the question Octave's asking. And what we've done is we've recruited people with rheumatoid arthritis, psoriatic arthritis, a condition called vasculitis, which is where, again, the immune system attacks the blood vessels, and people quite often have problems with, for example, kidneys or skin and other organs. But we're also recruiting people with inflammatory bowel disease. You maybe heard of a condition called Crohn's disease, inflammation of the bowel. People with cancer, both solid cancers, but also leukemias. And people with long-term kidney disease on dialysis or maybe having had a transplant, and people with long-term liver disease, same proviso. So we're looking at a whole range of diseases where people are either their immune system is damaged or less competent because of the disease they've got, exactly as I've just discussed, Claire, in answer to your question, or who are taking medicines that might mean the vaccine is less effective. And what we've done is we've taken blood samples before the vaccines were given and afterwards, and then before the boosters were given and afterwards. And we've now got well above 2,000 people in the study. It's a big trial. I'm afraid we're just not quite ready to tell you the answer. We're very, very close. That there are now data flying around the place. We're cleaning the data up. We're sending them back to be double and triple checked. We'll be talking to the government in the next few days about the results, and then we'll be talking to people, the really important people, that's you, as soon after that as we can. It's not going to take very long. I hope you'll forgive me. I'd rather tell you the right answer rather than a quick answer that I then have to come back in a couple of weeks and say, remember I said that? Well, actually what I meant was this. And it will probably be roughly the same message, but I'd rather tell you what we're talking about. But the important thing to know is that very, very soon we'll be beginning to understand what the impact of these different diseases and the medicines are. We have some hints. So not the OCTAVE trial. So just to be clear, not OCTAVE, but there was one study that was shown as a late-breaking study at the EULAR meeting a couple of weeks ago. So this is pretty hot off the press, which came from an Israeli group led by Professor Elkayam, and Ori actually is part of the EULAR vaccine task force. She's absolutely fabulous. And they looked at several hundred people with a whole range of immune rheumatic disorders. And by and large, most people were doing okay. There were some subgroups of folk who seemed to be in trouble. Early days in small numbers, but people with rituximab treatment, for example, were potentially not doing as well as we'd have liked. A drug called mycophenolate, and of course the ever-present steroids. You know, if you're on a steroid, that seems to mess up just about everything in life, doesn't it? So those were drugs that just got an early, let's be careful signal. And as I say, it's early days. We'll be talking about the OCTAVE data in the next few short number of weeks. And there are other data from the United States coming through that we're expecting to be able to talk about publicly very soon as well. My gestalt in all of this is that the majority of people will probably be okay. That's been our experience with other vaccines. And there will be a minority of people, really important people, by the way, in whom the vaccine response isn't as strong as we'd like it to be. And then, before you ask me, Ailsa, okay, back to the blood test question. How will I know? Because you'll say, right, do I do a blood test? And what will that tell me? And I'll answer you. Completely unsatisfactory answer is, well, it's where I started. We don't really know what a blood level means. What I would say is if the blood level is 0, then we've got a problem. You know, the old movie, Houston, we've got a problem. What we're going to do for those folk is straight away we're going to be boosting.
Yeah.
I think where it becomes a bit subtler is, well, my antibody level was such and such. And I was down talking to my friend on the phone yesterday, and she got her test done, and her antibody level was something higher than my antibody level, and she doesn't have rheumatoid arthritis. So does that mean I'm in trouble? And the answer is it's too soon to know. Because we've got lots of different bits of the immune system protecting us, and we don't really know what level of an antibody is necessary. Yeah. And of course, there's another subtlety in here, which is that you've all heard about these variants of concern now. You know, we used to talk about the football or the price of fish, and now we talk about the latest variant of concern. Well, maybe But actually, I have to tell you, we don't talk about football in Scotland just for the avoidance of doubt. Truth is that I'm actually worried that sometimes these tests are causing more anxiety